I feel like I ought to be drinking scotch since we're talking about these film noir movies, but unfortunately the library will not let me do that. So we can pretend that this is a lot more exciting than it is. So, all right. Well, welcome everybody to Noirvember. And tonight we've got deception, betrayal, lies, shady characters. Wait, is this film noir or a presidential election? Maybe both. Regardless, it is great to see you all tonight, and thank you for joining us. It's been a long time since we met, and Darnice actually had something that came up tonight at the last minute. So unfortunately, she can't be with us, but fortunately, we have Christina with us tonight filling in. So Christina, welcome, and thank you for joining us. All right, so remember, we want as many people participating as possible. So if you have a question or comment, don't be shy. We're getting a big crowd tonight, which is great, but no worries. Christina will be recognizing people that have a question or a comment. So for anybody that's joining us for the first time, please mute your microphone if you're not speaking. Also know that we will be discussing all aspects of tonight's films, both of them, including spoilers, so you have been warned. Also, we will be recording tonight's program in a few moments, so if you want to disable your camera or rename yourself, you can do that now. Now, if you're not already on our email list and would like to be, I will include my email address in the chat in just a few moments, and you can let me know if you'd like to be added to that list. I do encourage you to sign up. That's where I make announcements about upcoming discussions and other news. And remember, you don't have to live in Maryland to enjoy our programs. And it's great to have all these people from out of state, even out of country, joining us tonight. So thank you guys. So if you were with us last time, you remember our special guest, Todd Hitchcock at the AFI Silver, informed us that they would have a virtual international film noir festival on their website. I can send you the link to that, and you can now register for that online. It does cost money, and this is totally optional, but I knew at least a few of you would be interested in that. So the festival runs from November 13th through the 29th, and I will certainly be there virtually. Maybe some of you will as well. I sent a link to the festival in the last email for those who might be interested, but I'll also include it in the chat in just a few moments. Okay, so unless we have any questions, let's get right into our Noirvember double feature. Does anybody have any questions? Let us launch into our Noirvember double feature. So tonight we're talking about two low-budget film noir movies that are not only noir favorites, but are also recognized as film noir classics. Now, I'm willing to bet that no one who made these movies ever thought people would be watching them, much less talking about them 70 years after they were made. Both were independently produced, both made quickly for very little money, and both, like their protagonists, have had rough journeys. So with Detour, we've got a film that, at least as legend has it, was completed in 6 days for anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, which even back then was chicken feed. It was made by a company called Producers Releasing Corporation, or PRC, which you've probably never heard of, because it was what we call a Poverty Row studio. Now, other Poverty Row studios that you may have heard of are Republic or Monogram. The name Poverty Row really says it all. You can actually see every dollar of the low budget right there on the screen. Roger Ebert once said that Detour is so filled with mistakes that its director never would have passed film school. Now, we're going to talk about some of those mistakes a little bit later on. Some of them are pretty laughable. Now, Detour's director, Edgar G. Ulmer, was an Austrian who fled Nazi Germany, but not before apprenticing with a master filmmaker, F.W. Murnau, who directed a movie called Sunrise and a movie that we're going to take a look at next month called The Last Laugh. Now, Ulmer began working his way up the chain at Universal Studios when he made an extremely weird movie called The Black Cat from 1934, starring Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. Now, Ulmer ran into huge problems because the head of Universal Studios, Carl Laemmle, was on vacation while Ulmer was filming The Black Cat, and he had no idea how utterly strange this movie was going to be. Well, Laemmle came back from vacation, saw the movie, and had a fit. He hated it. And to make matters worse, Ulmer started dating the movie's continuity girl, who was the ex-wife of Carl Laemmle's cousin. So Ulmer was ousted, and he was reduced to making public service films. You know, those short films on how to prevent fires and how to avoid social diseases and that type of thing. But he learned how to make these films very quickly and very cheaply, which really served him well when it came to Detour. Now, people will often ask, what was the audience reaction to Detour at the time it was released? Well, the answer, there wasn't any audience reaction because nobody saw these movies in theaters. Almost nobody went to see Detour, and it became a hit because it went into the public domain and it showed on late night television. That's where people saw it. Now, I'll have a lot more to say about the stars of this film later, and trust me, it gets pretty bizarre. So, switching gears to D.O.A. D.O.A. is one of the wildest film noir movies ever. Eddie Muller calls this film the closest film noir ever got to being a Warner Brothers cartoon, with Edmund O'Brien giving, quote, a performance more animated than Daffy Duck. He frantically lunges in and out of rooms. You can almost see the animated motion lines poof from the door frames. O'Brien is so overheated, he can't stand still for a moment, lest he drown in a pool of sweat. End of quote. But, you know, if O'Brien had played it straight, it wouldn't have been nearly as memorable as it was. D.O.A. was made by a small company as well. This one was called Cardinal Pictures, and it was distributed by United Artists. But due to an oversight, the copyright was not renewed, so the film went into public domain. Like Detour, D.O.A. gained a lot of fans from playing on late night TV. Now, I couldn't find the figures on the budget for this movie, but it couldn't have been very much. Most of the San Francisco and Los Angeles location scenes were filmed illegally, which means without permits and without letting anybody know they were shooting a movie. So the surprised looks you see on the streets are really surprised looks. Nobody knew that a movie was going on. The idea from this story came from a 1931 German film called The Man Who Seeks His Murderer. And that was directed by Robert Siodmak, who directed many important film noir titles like The Killers, Crisscross, and Phantom Lady. Now, D.O.A.'s director, Rudolf Mattei, like Ulmer, was a European immigrant. And all these guys knew each other. Siodmak, Ulmer, Mattei, Billy Wilder, and more. So many of the noir themes, especially of desperation and fatalism, came from these guys who escaped the Nazis. So a lot of the film noir stuff, the desperation and the paranoia, it really does make sense. So both of these films are about desperate men in desperate situations. They both involve their protagonists trying to get away from some normal aspect of life. In both of these cases, it was marriage, pretty much. And they're searching for something else. So as we go through tonight's discussion, I think we'll find these movies have a lot of other things in common, certainly low budgets, the use of flashbacks, endings that don't treat their protagonists very kindly, and lots of other things. But for now, my first question is, I'm going to stick with the protagonists. Are these guys, Detour's Al Roberts, played by Tom Neal, and D.O.A.'s Frank Bigelow, played by Edmund O'Brien, are these guys personally responsible for the messes they're in, or are they victims of fate? What do you think? Okay, Bob, I think I saw your hand. Bob, unmute yourself, though.
Andy, you stole what was going to be my my first remark about this movie. Chris and I saw it, and we just watched it in absolute shock. I don't think we'd ever seen anything so awful. But then Chris found there's absolutely maybe the best movie review I have ever seen, and you've already alluded to it. Roger Ebert's review of this movie, where he starts off saying, Detour is a movie so filled with imperfections that it would not earn the director a passing grade in film school.
Yeah.
And yet this movie is in his list of great films. And he begins to explain it. I have rarely seen anyone so sympathetic to a movie. No money, no time to shoot, nothing, no script. I mean, it was, and yet people watch this thing to this good day. Ebert goes to great pains to say this entire movie is Al Roberts speaking to the audience saying, this isn't my fault. I was going to get blamed for it anyway. And so, I'm just another guy caught in the gears.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we got Bill, and then we got Jan. Okay, great point, Bob.
Oh, this is a really interesting film for me too. I mean, like, Andy, you always pick these films that are so interesting on so many levels. There's a lot that I agree with Bob about in terms of sort of how crazy and over the top it is. But there was another thing that was alluded to. I was thinking about it during the film, but then I found that Roger Ebert review and the reference to another review written by a guy named Andrew Britton. Mm-hmm. And he gets into this whole theory about Tom Neal's character, Al, as being an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
And the thing is, I think, like most film noirs, at least on the surface, it's like fate has it in for the protagonist. Like no matter what the protagonist does, he has been tripped by fate and just done very harshly. In fact, I read this great quote that was something like, there's so much awful things that's happened to Neal according to the story. He's so unlucky that he would get sympathy notes from Job himself, right? But the interesting thing about Britton's take on it was that obviously the whole thing is told in flashback, and it's some of the things are so crazy and over the top, particularly the strangling of Ann Savage from the door with the telephone cord, where any rational person would go, oh, I have to stop this phone call. Let me rip it out from the wall. And so he makes this case, and it actually raises the movie a lot for me. It makes it really less film noir and more psychodrama, that this is this guy rationalizing all of his actions throughout the film. He's an awful person who's done awful things, and he's trying to come up with these crazy ways of rationalizing it for people that are going to come listen to his story later, or maybe even rationalizing in his own mind so he can live with himself.
Yeah. Bill, great point, and that's a great interpretation that I've seen also before too, that is Al an unreliable narrator? Is he making up a lot of this stuff as he goes along, which is definitely something to think about. Okay, Jan, I'll have you next. Jan, you're muted. Yeah, can you unmute? Yeah, you're still muted.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay. Well, I'm going to disagree strongly with Bob. I think this is one of the top 5 film noir. If only for Ann Savage.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, she's a femme fatale for the ages. I mean, she is breathtaking in this role. So I will agree there are a few. I'd like to hear what the mistakes are, aside from the few we've listed. I do think the lead male character was responsible all the way, but the only break I'll give him was her character would paralyze all of us for a period of time. So cut him a little slack. At some point, he would have gotten out of there, though, when he realized what a psycho job
Yeah.
she was.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the overall film and her performance, which I think, as I said, was breathtaking. So I think on the basis of that, it is an exceptional film.
Okay, great. So let's hear from some more people. Are these guys responsible or victims of fate? Okay, I see Debbie and Matthew
And Sue.
and Sue. Okay, Debbie.
Okay, I don't know. I think if we assume that this guy, if things went the way this guy said, and this passenger of his died, okay, the way he says, I thought, why is he assuming that people are going to think that he killed him? And he doesn't know that. I mean, he was taking pills and stuff. So I thought that he brought a lot of his problems on himself by making stupid decisions, like stealing his identity. I was like, good grief. You're scared of being caught for something you don't even know you did, and you're stealing his identity now? You really are stupid. And then he picks up a hitchhiker. Duh. That's it.
And not just any hitchhiker either.
Really, I mean, seriously, but I mean, he's just not using his head.
Yeah.
So I mean, he does bring on. I think he has kind of a loser mentality. He just kind of assumes that everything's going to go against him, and oh well, I guess I'm just stuck with whatever. And he really wasn't very. He just was really stupid, I thought. That was part of his problem.
And that is part of it. And we're going to bring up more about that in just a moment. So great comment. Matthew, you're up.
Yeah, and I'd like to agree with Debbie that Al, when he made the choice to assume the identity to take the car, at that point, his life had not been great, but it was his fault at that point to let off the chain. So I think that protagonist you can blame. And then Frank, though, I think Frank was completely blameless in what he did. And I'd heard that comment about the cartoon character on Noir Alley when it was shown. And I thought about that. And yeah, I mean, he was a little excited in the movie. But if I was to start not feeling good tomorrow and went to a doctor and the doctor said you have been poisoned and have basically 48 hours to live, I might be a bit of a basket case myself.
Good point. Excellent. Sue, I believe you were next.
Yeah, part of the beginning of the film, particularly in the dark driving, reminded me of the Twilight Zone. And it was just, to me, it could have been just picked up by the people who did Twilight Zone, because it's like this happens and now you have no control over the situation. But after about a few minutes, all I wanted to do was shake this guy and be his mother and tell him, oh, for God's sake, get your act together. Like, keep being so stupid. And so I understand that this may be more to this retroactive, comments about it, this whole thing, that he in fact had some other agenda, but clearly he was a loser all the way. And but Ann Savage was fabulous. But I have to say, some of the things that were weird about the film which threw me crazy, which was when the cars were going the wrong direction and they were driving on the left side of the road. And when Ann Savage had her hair was like, wait a minute, what happened to her hairstyle? Oh, wait a minute. Of course, I noticed these things, but I agree with Ann. I thought she was spectacular.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you bring up a couple of the big mistakes in the film is, people are driving on the wrong side of the road, and that's because they flipped the negative.
Yeah.
There was just like no oversight in this thing. There's lots of problems like that. Now, to get the look that Ulmer wanted for Ann Savage, he had her mix cold cream and dirt and put it in her hair. And that's why her hair looks like that. We'll have more to say about her later, but yeah, she did quite a number in this film. This is really a memorable performance. Okay, Bob and then Jim. Bob, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, I apologize.
That's okay.
One of the reviewers, Ebert, or maybe the guy that Ebert was quoting, said that this entire thing was an excuse for Roberts to explain why he wanted to steal the guy's wallet. He would never have been convicted of a crime. The guy died of a stroke or a heart attack. He falls out, hits his head. Even the dumbest coroner in California or Arizona, wherever it happened, is not going to confuse a crushing head injury with post-mortem injury, because post-mortem injuries don't bleed. So, you know, it was an entire excuse for the guy to get away with stealing the wallet.
Yeah.
And it got out of his hands.
I get a feeling that a lot of research probably didn't go into the script writing portion of this film. Jim, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I read that the reason why they were why they flipped the negatives is that the director wanted to have the cars going in a certain way, and his budget didn't have the amount to go the opposite way. And so just flipping the negatives gave him the direction.
Yeah, that's probably true. You know, this was supposed to be a coast to coast journey, and it all took place on a little 15-mile stretch right outside the studio. So he had to try to do something to make it look different if he could. That certainly was one thing. All right, well, here's a question for you. So we've got Frank Bigelow and D.O.A. going to the big city pretty much to avoid marriage, at least for a while. And we got Al Roberts and Detour, who's going to the city for marriage. Now, film noir seems to be telling us that with love or without it, fate is going to get you. How did you see the love relationships playing out in these films? Okay, who's first?
I was going to say that for the case of Mr. Bigelow, it sounds like he figured out, you know, what was important to him when it was too late. But of course, that's the classic, right? When it's too late.
Yeah, yeah. That really is a bittersweet ending because, yeah, he really does learn at the end what he had going, and of course, it's too late. Okay, I saw Jeff and then Bill B.
Yeah, just the beginnings of D.O.A. You can see that Bigelow he feels like, I think he's being smothered by I don't remember the blonde girl's name, but he doesn't seem necessarily like a bad guy, but like he's getting a lot of pressure from her. And then when he gets to San Francisco, the guy just turns into a total wolf loser, you know, like he's looking at everything with a skirt. And of course, they put that wolf whistle in there, which I don't know why anybody thought that was a good idea. But yeah, you feel a lot less sympathy for him then. And like, well, come on, guy, you've got this beautiful lady that is in love with you and would do anything for you, and you're just pushing her away. And so, yeah, you feel a lot less sympathy for him once he gets to San Francisco, and you kind of get a better insight into what kind of guy he really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we got Bill B, and then, all right, that's it for now. Okay, Bill?
Yeah, I must say I didn't really feel very much sympathy for either character in terms of their love relationships. They were both very self-centered. Jeff's already pointed out the fact that Edmund O'Brien's character was basically just felt trapped in this relationship. And actually, if I have a criticism of the film in general, I think one of the reasons it falls a little below the upper echelon for me is, now I love the premise. The premise is outstanding. The whole thing about walking into the police station right at the beginning, I've been murdered, and the plot is very clever, and there's a lot of things I like about it. But I thought the script was pretty weak in some places, and particularly the characterizations, and to a certain extent, the overacting by some of the lesser characters. And it just seemed like this was a very kind of two-dimensional relationship between the two of them. And it was almost like his relationship to her was just so superfluous. It was almost like they had these phone calls back and forth where she would contact him and everything. And it was almost like a plot device just to further, oh, here's another clue for you to follow. And then abruptly, 2/3 of the way through, oh, I've decided I love you, and it's, and it was just so out of character from where the rest of it was. So I think there was a lot, particularly the Mate, obviously, even with a low budget, showed his chops in terms of the way he used the camera and how he was able to do pretty decent action scenes with a low budget. So there was a lot to recommend to it. And I think the plot devices were in a lot of ways way ahead of their time.
Yeah.
But there was some ham-handedness about it. If it had had a better script and better characterizations, I think they could have done more with this great plot that they had.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. And Bill, one of the things about Mate was he was a cinematographer before he was a director. He had done many, many films as a cinematographer. So he pretty much knew what he wanted, and he knew how to make a movie look good, even on a low budget. You got a really good point about the minor characters too. There's so much going on there. Probably the guy that's the most cartoonish guy is Neville Brand, that plays Chester. Who is so out of control. All he wants to do is shoot Edmund O'Brien in the belly. You like it in the belly, don't you? I'll give it to you in the belly. I mean, he
poor man's Richard Widmark, right?
He is a poor man's Richard Widmark. But the thing about Brand is he's in a lot of movies, and this was really early in his career. And if you didn't know it, Neville Brand was one of the most decorated soldiers in World War II. He was a huge World War II hero. And you would never know it from looking at him, but he was a very well-read man. He owned over 30,000 books, and apparently he had read most all of them. He certainly does not look like he would be a very literary guy, but he is. But yeah, I think he's probably the most over-the-top secondary character in this film. Okay, other people. Okay, Bill Snyder and then Matthew.
Speaking of other characters, I heard a voice in D.O.A. and I looked it up, and it really was the guy who played Sam Drucker on Petticoat Junction and Green Acres had a very big part as the bartender in one of the early scenes in D.O.A. And I heard his voice and I thought, that's got to be him. And I looked it up and it was. But yeah. Now, what I really wanted to say was we were talking about the differences between the two male characters, and in Detour, he actually wanted to get married. It was the woman who didn't want to. She wanted to go off to Hollywood and make her fortune and whatever. And so it was a completely different kind of relationship than D.O.A., where he was pushing her away. He was actually being pushed away. So he was actually going out to California to claim the girl, or hopefully, be able to marry. So kind of different different scenario there than between the two.
Yeah, one was really kind of getting away from marriage, and one was kind of going to it, but they both had the same end pretty much. Matthew, you were next.
Yes, I just thought it was interesting in both films. In so many Hollywood films, no matter what the genre, no matter what the film, there's always a love interest in play, even if it's somewhat secondary. It's throughout the whole picture, and maybe towards the end they get together. But in both of these films, there's a love interest introduced at the very beginning, and then it's dispensed with, and it's the one character then throughout the rest of the movie, pretty much.
Yeah, that happens quite frequently, as you said. That's true. Well, let's talk a little bit about how different we talked a little bit about how the films are similar in so many ways, but let's talk about the ways they might be different. And one way in particular that they're different is the plot in Detour is really pretty straightforward. But in D.O.A., it is all over the place. And if anybody wants to take a stab at explaining exactly what happened in D.O.A. in 25 words or less, I will give you a prize. but what did you think about the different ways that the plots were? I mean, pretty simple to absolutely nuts. And I got Jeff coming up, but let's hear from some people we haven't heard from before. Okay, we got Jeff, and then we got Wally. Okay, Jeff?
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. Detour is basically man picks up girl, regrets it fiercely. And I think I'd seen D.O.A. 3 times. And once again, I looked at it, I said, I can't make head nor tail of this. But it honestly doesn't really matter. You know, it's once he finds out it's poisoned, it's just, he moves towards the resolution of that. But yeah, I cannot figure that plot out. Like, there's a couple of characters that are mentioned, but you never meet them, and it's all about the bill of sale. But like the little guy in the white suit, I don't know what he is, why he's in there. It's weird, yeah. But yeah, you can almost dispense with all those superfluous characters because it's about him finding what happened to him. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things that really makes film noir is you've got a protagonist that has all these things going on that he can't understand, and a lot of times we as the audience can't understand what's going on, and that is part of the confusion that makes his world so crazy. So, and D.O.A. did a great job of that. Okay, Wally, I think we got you next.
Yeah, I liked both movies. I felt they were engaging enough. I like the simplicity of Detour. It was the story sucked me in well enough that I didn't notice the errors. You know, maybe I might have watched it at a faster pace. I'm not sure, but with respect to the plot, yeah, I agree that D.O.A. seemed to be all over the place. And when I think about it, I get the impression the movie was made based on that premise, that first scene where he walks in and reports his own. It's like somebody was like, oh, what if there was a movie about somebody who reported his own murder?
Yeah.
And then they now work backwards to justify that plot.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that problem. We got to meet characters we didn't really need to meet, and some scenes looked like they were thrown in there just to add cheap action. For instance, he finds out he's dying and then he runs a marathon across the whole city. Like, so yeah, even the premise for wanting to leave to another town. Like, why are you going on a vacation? You don't know anybody. You just have to go and you have to leave. Like, I understand wanting to leave your girlfriend behind, but you wouldn't tell her you're going on a vacation if that's the case, you know. And then if you're going on a vacation, you just go there without planning or knowing anybody, and you just feel you have to go, and then you go and then you follow. I mean, it all didn't make sense to me, but the characters were, I think, engaging enough or intriguing enough to follow, you know, or rather we're trained to root for the characters and follow them, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you. I think Jan has something, and then maybe Bill Sakura. Did you have? Okay, Jan and then Bill.
Just say with the two movies, even though you're suspending belief for both of them, I had a harder time with D.O.A. and it was because of this, you know, frantic energy on the Edmund O'Brien's part to find out why. If you were given 2 days to live with this horrendous poison, would you spend all that time doing that? I mean, wouldn't you enjoy San Francisco a little bit more? It was, I couldn't get beyond it. And then when he finally got it, I don't know, it didn't seem overwhelming relief. Okay, I got 10 more minutes to live. I don't know. I found it hard to relate to that character.
Yeah.
That caused me to not enjoy it as much as I really like Detour.
Okay, but Jan, if somebody poisoned you, wouldn't you want to know who did it?
I would, but I wouldn't devote the whole time to it. I don't think I would have gone to Los Angeles. I'll put it that way.
I think I'm with you. If I only had 48 hours, I think I could have found some fun stuff to do in my last 48 hours.
Exactly.
Okay, Bill Sakura, how about it?
So for Bigelow, the character, first of all, he's like an accountant, and how does he become the great detective and be able to put all these things together. He shouldn't have had the skill set if he's really just kind of your everyday accountant, but he came off as the classic noir, uh, you know, detective guy, gumshoe type thing. Um, and then I think it was the plot was trying to uh, really give him credibility in the fact that he was able to figure that out with so many things in such a relatively short period of time,
Yeah.
that he actually solved why someone tried to kill him. And
Okay. Yeah. No. And I never thought about that, about him not having the skill set to be a detective, but that's a good point. That totally makes sense. Okay. We got Chuck, and then Bill Schneider, and then Bill Bates.
Yeah, so basically, some of the two between the two stories, I just kind of thought about some of the themes that are common in film noir, like for D.O.A, like fate, or the protagonist making a decision and then getting in deeper by making more terrible decisions. And Vera, the femme fatale, who entraps him not with her sexuality, but basically her sheer willpower to entrap him. And then the other, for D.O.A, I was thinking about the wrong man. He's a man who they maybe poisoned the wrong man, and he's basically a detective trying to solve his own murder. So some of the common themes that you would find in other film noirs is kind of how I looked at both of the plots.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good. We got Bill Schneider, and then Bill Bates, and then Wally.
Well, I have just the opposite opinion to what Jan had earlier. I found it easier to deal with Bigelow than it was to deal with the other guy in Detour. It was I found there was just too many things, like thinking that he killed the guy because he fell out of the car. He looked like he was already dead before he even opened the door. I mean, there's just so many things like that bothered me, that I had much harder time with that movie, with the character, than I did with Bigelow. Yeah, okay, maybe he wouldn't have been the great detective, but some of the stuff he did was pretty logical. It wouldn't have been that hard to think about. And I think I would have wanted to figure out who killed me and why. So I found it easier to deal with that one.
Okay, good. Bill Bates, then Wally.
Yeah, I'm largely in agreement with the earlier statement about Detour was a very classic, simple tale. Obviously, if you buy into that theory, told by an unreliable narrator, whereas D.O.A was like one of the more convoluted plots I've ever seen. And I think even if you see it 2 or 3 times, there's going to be pieces where you're not sure quite how they fit. And that is one of the weaknesses I see in the film. I think the plot was a little unnecessarily convoluted. It didn't have to take quite so many twists and turns to have the same effect in terms of chasing the clues down. Like having the guy Reynolds actually turn out to be a different name, for example. Right. I thought that was sort of a needless thing that just made it a little bit more complicated and harder to follow. Still in all, it works and you go with it, but that I think was a little unnecessary in terms of how densely plotted it was. It had such a great basic idea. I think it could have taken a little simpler path to it and been an even better movie.
I think you might have something there. It totally is convoluted, and I don't know that it needed to be that convoluted to express the frustrations that Bigelow was going through. Okay, Wale.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the notion that he was a detective. A lot of the clues he got just happened to fall in his lap. You know, he was just bumbling all over the place, making all sorts of stupid decisions, and I guess locking into the revelations. Like you heard that this guy died, so you go to his workplace, and no no nuance at all. Just go there, attacking people, shouting, and if the guy he was talking to was the killer, he could have killed him right there, and that would have been the end of the story. The guy sends him to the wife. He goes and no tact attacks the wife, asks stupid questions. That takes him nowhere. Eventually gets to the crooks, who tell him, they give him the plot. He really doesn't really seem to figure out anything on his own.
Yeah.
The movie just keeps happening to him because, I mean, of course, he makes a lot of stupid decisions to start with.
Yeah.
And some of the decisions just don't make any sense. Like he goes to the bar with some people, he leaves them and goes to talk to this lady for no, well, I don't know why, but maybe she was the most beautiful thing he ever saw in his life. I don't understand, but he goes to her, gets poisoned. I don't know. I don't think he was really a detective at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Once he gets to San Francisco, his thinking processes are totally out the window. He's just gone. And then once he sees a couple of pretty faces, it's all over. It's totally all over. Well, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the two lead actors. I found some interesting information about them, and I would like to hear your thoughts about them. Now, the stories of Tom Neal, who played in Detour, and Edmund O'Brien from D.O.A., they could not be more different. Now, as a young man, Edmund O'Brien, believe it or not, was quite handsome and several pounds lighter than you see him in D.O.A. He made his screen debut in 1939 in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He did not play the Hunchback. That was Charles Laughton. But O'Brien, if you go back and just do a Google search of Edmund O'Brien and Hunchback of Notre Dame, I think you'll be shocked at how good looking the guy was. But he put on a few pounds, which was perfect for what he did later, which is to become kind of an everyman in all of his movie roles after that. He actually won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar in 1954 for his role as a movie publicist in The Barefoot Contessa, starring Ava Gardner and Humphrey Bogart. He made a lot of film noir titles and a lot of Westerns, did a lot of TV. He had a really long and distinguished career until his death in 1974. Well, Tom Neal, he had a very different story. Now, Tom Neal really was Al Roberts. In a lot of ways, he was just a real loser. Now, it may not look like it, but Neal actually had an Ivy League education, and he was a boxer in college. Now, that will be important in just a moment. So Neal was a steady worker in B movies in the 40s, and he was a little bit more assertive than Al Roberts. In fact, he was a real ladies' man. He famously had an affair with an actress named Barbara Payton. And in her autobiography, Payton said this of Tom Neal. This is a quote. "He had a chemical buzz for me that sent red peppers down my thighs." Wow. So when Payton married actor Fran Chotone, Tom Neal beat him up so badly he almost killed him. And there's the boxing coming in again. Now, Neal eventually quit the movie business and started a landscaping company. And when Neal's wife, Patricia Fenton, died, Neal sent his one-year-old son, Tom Jr., to live with Neal's sister. Then Neal married a woman named Gail Clockey. Now, 4 years later, Clockey was shot to death, and Neal was arrested for the murder. Neal was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and spent 6 years in prison. But wait, it gets weirder. Several months after he was released from prison, Neal died of a heart attack in a Hollywood apartment. Who found the body? Neal's son, Tom Neal Jr., who was 15 years old at the time. It gets weirder still. So Tom Neal Jr. starred in a 1992 remake of Detour, playing the same part of Al Roberts, just like his dad. Now, Tom Neal and his son were both 31 years old when they took on the roles, and both men died at the age of 58. It's one of the weirdest Hollywood stories on record. by the way, I have not seen the 1992 remake of Detour, but by all accounts, Bob, it's even worse than you would think this one is. So knowing what you know about those two actors, what did you think about their performances? Jeff, and then Bob.
Well, I've seen a lot of stuff that Edmund O'Brien has done, including a lot of good noirs like The Hitchhiker and Shield from Murder, two that come to mind right away. But you also look at him in stuff like Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and The Wild Bunch. Like he turned into a good character actor later in his life, and those are indelible like character roles. The last two I mentioned. So I just always thought he was a good, solid guy.
He's one of my favorites too. Bob, I think I saw your hand.
I've always enjoyed D.O.A. as much as I didn't care for Detour, although I want to see Detour again because of Ebert's review now. I saw this movie in San Francisco when I was 10 years old. And I immediately fell in love with this guy because when I realized he was going to die from luminous poisoning, I figured he was going to glow at the end of this movie. And I've approached my feeling about that movie that way ever since. I mean, this was going to be really not just film noir, but for a 10-year-old, seeing a guy glow is something to behold. Also wanted to add this. To get to that movie, my father was stationed at Letterman Hospital in the Presidio. I had to take 2 buses and a streetcar. I saw the movie on Market Street. There's right near where Edmund O'Brien was running past. And I'm looking at a movie that has murder, attempted murder, adultery, extensive and unremitting alcohol and tobacco abuse, kidnapping, sexual innuendo, poisoning, interstate trafficking of dangerous chemicals, assault, battery, psychopathic sadism, forgery, fraud, and speeding. So, that was in 1950. Can you imagine letting a kid running loose in the biggest city between Los Angeles and Seattle and watching a movie that's got that in it?
Yeah. That's a lot of stuff for sure. Okay, somebody else, thoughts on either Edmund O'Brien or Tom Neal? Bill Bates?
Yeah, I think O'Brien was very solid. I've always liked him, particularly his later character roles. Though I would have been really interested in seeing somebody like a Bogart play that role and see if there might have been a little more heft to it. There's so much sort of that you can read in Bogart's soul and so much of the noir stuff. And with O'Brien, it was like very solid performance and obviously very physical. I was fearing for him having a heart attack every time I would see him do these sprints, right?
Right.
But and Neal, I thought was fine. The thing is, it's, as you know, it's such an over the top movie, and again, if you look at it in terms of that thing of unreliable narrator, it makes more sense to me because, as Jan said, I loved Ann Savage's performance, but you in terms of, she was such a one-dimensional character. I mean, there was no femme in her fatale, right? It's like she tried very half-heartedly to come on with sexual innuendo and everything, but in the end, she was just a one-note character. And that's why I think it adds credence to the idea that in his mind, he's just going, oh, well, she was just a harpy from the word go. Just a one-dimensional character. There was no real, there was no 3 dimensions about it. Though as a one-dimensional character, I agree. Ann Savage played it to the hilt. And
yeah, and you know, I kind of will. I understand what you're saying. I might disagree with you a little bit because I think when she does that, come on, and she puts her hand on his shoulder and she says, "I'm getting ready for bed." I mean, of course she's drunk at that point, but there's also something in her, I think, that wants, you know, a genuine affection or attention or something like that. But yeah, we got to talk about Vera, played by Ann Savage. I mean, and Ann Savage played almost exclusively in B movies. And the thing about Vera is she's the one that everybody remembers from this movie. And she doesn't even show up until the movie's halfway over, but she's the one everybody remembers. And I mean, when Al Roberts thinks things can't get any worse, man, there she is. And I have to tell you another Eddie Muller quote. He says in his book, Dark City of Vera, he says, quote, "Let's hope there's not another one like her back home." Vera is hands down the shrillest, meanest, bitchiest shrew to ever escape from Dark City, end quote. And you know, she's scarier than most characters in horror movies. I mean, she is, people have called her the most wicked femme fatale of them all. Do you think she deserves that title?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, didn't Ebert called her a castrator, I think. Wasn't that his?
A castrator.
Yeah, like which...
well, somebody muted Jeff and it wasn't me. Okay, so Jan, you had something and then we'll get Jim.
Yes, clearly she deserves this title because she isn't on our Eddie Muller discussion. I brought up about Ava Gardner and the Killers. Okay, there's a femme fatale that you can see why he was so awestruck when he saw her. She's an attractive woman, but she isn't Ava Gardner category. And I think that's what got to me in her acting, that she overcame that. She's not, you know, unattractive, but she's not what you think of the femme fatale.
Yeah.
Also, just as a brief little thing, I saw this maybe within the past 6 months. It must have been on TCM. I can't remember where, but they gave a little discussion about Ann Savage. When he picks her up when she's hitchhiking, he's at the gas station. The sweater that she has on wasn't fit for her. It was too big, but they wanted to use it because of the constrained budget. And in the one scene I saw it watching it this week, they've got clothespins in the back of it, fitting it to her body to make it fit to use the sweater.
Right.
So just interesting with that. But yes, I think that's why I go back to her acting, that she overcame it to be the scariest. And I agree with Eddie. This is the scariest woman I've seen in a movie.
And you know, this really should have propelled her to bigger movies. But again, nobody saw this movie when it came out. You know, very few people probably saw it. Nobody reviewed it. And so probably people didn't see this performance until at least 20 years after she made it. So that was really too bad. Jim, you were next.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that Vera wanted to have control over him in any way she could, and she wanted to have sexual control too, and that's where she was failing. She was doing her best to control that situation, and that wasn't working for her. I also think that stuff was things to push the limits of the code at the time too, I think.
Yeah. No, that is a really good point, Jim. And the thing about the code, and Sue, I'll get you in just a second. The production code really didn't pay as close attention to these Poverty Row films as they did to the big budget films, obviously because they knew they were going to be seen by more people. But you make a great point about her sexuality and how she tries to use it. I think that's exactly on target, totally on target. Sue, you were next.
Yeah, well, I think it was, in terms of comparing the two films, in terms of plot, this plot had some complications to it that you didn't see coming, but when they came, you go, oh, that's cool, versus the other one, which was wait a minute, what happened there? Who had the iridium? Wait, why do they want the iridium?
Right,
but that plot of where she finally reveals that she's married to the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so fun. And So yeah, she was a femme fatale, but you know what? They exist. There are people like her around.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Thankfully, I haven't met too many of them, and hopefully none of us will. And you know that we can't be exclusive, because you can also run into a homme fatale as well.
Oh,
So,
right.
you know, so that can happen as well too. You know, I wonder what this movie would have looked like and sounded like. Can you imagine if they would have allowed profanity at that time? What would have been coming out of Vera's mouth? We probably couldn't even discuss it. But yeah, just a character you will never forget. That's for sure. Somebody else. Okay,
Andy,
Bill?
I noticed that Jay has had his virtual hand up for a while.
Oh, I have not seen that. I am so sorry. Jay, let's get you, and then we'll get Bill Sikora. I'm not able to see the hand, the virtual hand, I guess. Can you see it, Christina?
It's down now, but it was up.
Okay, Jay, let's certainly get, I'm sorry we've neglected you.
Well, this isn't really about the current topic, so I'm going to make comments all over the map.
Sure.
You mentioned the production code. My understanding is that the ending of Detour was written to fit the production code, that originally he got away with it, or at least you don't know what happens to him. So I don't know that they weren't looking at low budget films as well. And again, I don't know whether this is true or not. I had read this somewhere and I don't remember where. For all I know, it's in the trivia section of IMDb.
Yeah.
And that, you know, could be anything. Someone else mentioned glowing as a result of the iridium. Makes me think of the Mike Hammer movie, Kiss Me Deadly, which if you want to see some glowing, there's a film noir that I would highly recommend. Maybe Andy, you want to put that on the list if you haven't already, of films to see.
Yeah.
My thinking when it comes to D.O.A. is it would have been much better film if he had been poisoned inadvertently. It was meant for somebody else and he got it. And then he would have had to figure out why somebody else was after somebody else. Because when I originally saw the film and I knew a little bit more than I probably should have at that point, that he was being slid the poison, I didn't know that it was necessarily for him. It could have been anybody at the bar. And I think that would have made it a more interesting film. But it didn't bother me that it was convoluted, because for film noir in general, plots typically are convoluted, and it doesn't matter. It only matters where your sympathies lie with which characters. And the more they do bad stuff, the more you root for them.
Right.
That's the beauty, I think, of film noir.
Yeah.
Suspension of belief, I think, is also part of that. Anyway, that's my random thoughts for a little bit of both films. Nothing about the actors. I don't particularly think any of the acting in any of those films was good, but I love the shots of the streets going through LA. I think those were just incredible shots. And the production value there for one film over the other, just in those alone, is pretty significant. I don't know who shot them, but and Edmund O'Brien may not be the best actor in that film, but I would be hard pressed to be running through the streets like that with a camera following me. I give him great kudos for those shots.
Yeah. And especially when the people around him had no idea that a movie was actually being filmed. So yeah. Great points, Jay. Thank you so much. Let's see. I think Sue, did we get you? We got you. Okay. All right. Okay. Bill Sikora. Sorry about that. Bill?
That's fine. So a question for everybody. Because they stated that luminous poisoning is a real thing, is luminous poisoning a real thing? Do you believe them?
I'm sorry, Bill, I couldn't quite hear your question. Could you ask it again?
The question is, they stated that luminous poisoning is a real thing to try to give some credibility to their plot. How many people believe that luminous poisoning is a real thing?
And if you don't know, Bill is a doctor, so I have a feeling he's going to tell us.
I'm just curious because I can't find anything about luminous poisoning or any kind of luminous poison. I guess a heavy metal could potentially, a radioactive heavy metal could potentially give you slow poisoning like that, but there's no luminous poison, that would be, you'd be able to walk into a doctor's office in the streets of San Francisco and that they would be able to diagnose within a half hour using a barium enema up on an X-ray film.
Well, you've ruined my day, Bill. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, Wally, we got you. Yeah.
Even without seeing the you know, the disclaimer at the end, or should I say the claimer at the end, the whole medical thing doesn't make so much sense. You know, you go to the doctor and the likelihood that they would, you know, at the outpatient give you a test for that specific glowing poison is so low. You know, it's very unlikely that they would have that kind of test ready for you. They would have like tried every single thing else. Maybe might have even given you a C scan or something. I mean, CT scan before, you know, trying to look for some random old, some random poison. And then the way they talked about the way the poison acts also, you know, didn't make so much sense. But yeah, it's been done before. I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre also claimed to be based on a true story. I guess it was inspired by a real character, but it wasn't based on a true story. So movies do that a lot to I guess get more investment from the audience.
Yeah, and did you also, the test results came back like that? I mean,
yeah,
it's a good thing he didn't have COVID-19, you know? He would have been out way before he found out anything. But no, that's a great point. Bob?
I keep telling you guys, you're not watching this from the right point of view. If you think you're a 10-year-old when you're watching this thing, this movie makes perfect sense.
Yes, I agree.
Well, you know, it is a movie, so we all had to determine what amount of disbelief we're going to suspend. So, no, I appreciate your point. All right, Bill B, and then it's going to be time for some recommendations.
Yeah, I'm Bill Sikora. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going by the claimer, so-called claimer at the end, and what I saw in Wiki, which certainly didn't dispel that there wasn't any such thing, but I regret that I didn't go that last extra step of trying to find if there was a luminescent poison out there. And because I remember my feeling watching the film was, wow, that's a stretch, you know, a luminescent poison and as you pointed out, that you could test readily, but you've never heard of this ever happening anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we are a little bit past 8 o'clock, but I wanted to give you some recommendations before we go. And as Jay brought up, Kiss Me Deadly is a fantastic recommendation. I didn't include it. We do have it in the library on DVD, but I don't think it's playing on Canopy. But all of the recommendations I have for you tonight are from Canopy. So everything that I'm about to tell you, you can find there. And I have not one, not two recommendations, but 10 recommendations for you. This is Noirvember, so here are a lot of them. And if you don't get them all, I'm going to put it in the next email so you can get those. So I have 4 old school films for you to check out on Canopy and 6 newer films. So the first one I have for you is called The Big Combo. Now, The Big Combo is just a wonderful standard film noir with great characters. And we talked a little bit about cinematography. This has superb cinematography. It's got one of the most iconic endings that you'll see in all of film noir. So again, that's called The Big Combo. A British noir, which I really, really enjoy. And I think one of the best British noirs I've seen is called Brighton Rock. And that stars Richard Attenborough as a young punk, which he would not become later on in life, but this is a very, very effective film, Brighton Rock. One of the strangest noirs you will see, even stranger than D.O.A, is called The Chase. This is a movie that David Lynch must have seen at some point. It is so weird and so bizarre. It features Peter Lorre, and that's all I'm going to tell you about it, but you got to check it out. It is really, really odd. One of my favorite heist movies is Kansas City Confidential, and it stars one of my favorite noir actors, John Payne, and that's Payne, John Payne. Kansas City Confidential is another low-budget film like the two that we had tonight, and if you like heist movies, you're going to really enjoy it. So let's get into the newer stuff, and by newer, I mean from the 1970s up to today. So my first one is called The Friends of Eddie Coyle, which features Robert Mitchum with a Boston accent. Well, that alone should bring you in to see that film. Again, that's called The Friends of Eddie Coyle. And then there's Budapest Noir. Now, this is a pretty new movie that came out just a couple of years ago that not many people are talking about, but they should. It's got a great period look to it and a period feel, but it's in color, not in black and white. Tremendous movie. Another one that is fun, it's kind of a parody of film noir, or you could say it's a love letter to film noir, is called Trouble Is My Business. You'll have a lot of fun with this because it does play around with a lot of the film noir tropes. It's funny, and you'll have a good time with that one. The next one is not funny, but it is a wonderful film called The Silent Partner. And this is from 1978 or 79. It's a terrific cat and mouse game between a banker, played by Elliot Gould, and Christopher Plummer plays a bank robbing Santa Claus. You got to see it just for that. And Jeff, it's a Canadian film. So there we go.
Yeah, I don't like that one actually.
Oh, okay.
A lot of that is filmed in the big mall in downtown Toronto, yeah.
Okay,
John Candy's in it as well.
John Candy's in it for a brief moment, so I'm going to mute Jeff for right now. I'm kidding, Jeff. But I think he'll like it. Another low-budget movie is called Private Property. Now, this is a home invasion noir, so if you're into those films like The Desperate Hours, this is another home invasion noir. This features Warren Oates in one of his very first films. And then a film I think I probably mentioned before called Victoria. This is a German heist movie, and the thing that's interesting about Victoria is it's all filmed in one unbroken take. There are no cuts. From beginning to end is one take. So there are 10 and 11 now, thanks to the movie that Jay recommended, Kiss Me Deadly. There's 11 movies for you to check out in Noirvember. So lots of noir for you to enjoy. And there's other noir films on Canopy as well. Those are just the ones that I recommend. But there's lots of great stuff to check out. Well, thank you once again. Jay, you have a word?
I want Andy, I came in late, so I don't know whether you mentioned this already, but Noir City, DC starts in November 13th at 85 Silver virtually. So
I did.
You did mention it. Okay.
I did mention it. And you know, I'm glad you mentioned it, Jay, because I forgot to put that in the chat.
I just did.
Oh, you just did. Very good. Thank you so much. So yeah, the Noir City International, if you want to check that out, and I highly encourage you to. It's not free, but it's for a good cause. And I hope you will consider checking that out. Well, again, thank you. And Jan, you have something?
Andy, just a quick question. Why is November associated with film noir?
Noirvember.
Just as simple as that, right? Okay.
Right. Okay, Jeff?
You probably are too modest to mention it, but I just wanted to throw out to people the podcast that you did on Detour for the Movie Palace a year or so ago. I hope you put a link to that in your email because everybody would enjoy that.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeff. That's very kind of you. I will include that. And, you know, if anybody would like to listen to that podcast where we talked specifically about Detour, I would love to, I'll be glad to add that to you. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. I'm going to take this hat off and try to look normal for at least the last 30 seconds or so of our talk. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christina, for being with us tonight. And that's going to do it for this time. And I hope you'll join me next Friday as we salute our veterans and discuss the 1946 classic, The Best Years of Our Lives. All right. Everybody have a great weekend Take care. Don't try to look at the election results too much and refresh those pages too much. So I will see you next time. Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.